My fiancé scorned my silk robes and vast fortune, yet he was utterly smitten by a peasant girl clad in patched rags. What could I do? Of course, I granted his wish. Fortunately, my future mother-in-law was reasonable and deeply understanding. A blind son like that? Better off without him. But on my wedding day, he stumbled before me in ragged clothes, begging me to reconsider. I smiled brightly. From now on, you should address me as sister-in-law. Shinchini returned from his studies, bringing with him a pregnant woman. The news reached me while I was selecting a jade pendant for him in the exotic treasures pavilion. A momentary lapse of attention caused a palm-sized piece of exquisite green jadeite to slip from my grasp, shattering into 2 pieces upon the floor. The maid hurried over to examine my hand. "Miss, are you hurt?" "I'm fine. It's just a pity about this jade. I already thought it wasn't large enough, and now it's even smaller. How can I possibly present it like this?" I shook my head, unable to suppress a sigh. "Miss, what time is it now? And you're still thinking about this worthless stone?" Yue released my hand and angrily waved her delicate fist at the air. "With your wedding to the young master imminent, how dare he bring someone else into the mansion? Isn't this bullying you, miss?" She had a point. I tore my gaze away from the jade and nodded solemnly. Indeed, there were matters more pressing than jade right now. Before I could say anything, the steward of the chancellor's residence burst into the exotic treasures pavilion, panting heavily. His eyes lit up upon seeing me, and he hurriedly said, "Missy, I've finally found you. Would you be available now? My mistress wishes to invite you to the residence for a discussion." An invitation from the mistress? Of course I'm available. I nodded in agreement, accepting the invitation while turning back to instruct the shopkeeper to find me several larger, finer jade pieces. Yue sighed exasperatedly. "Miss, you aren't still thinking of giving that wretched son-in-law a gift, are you?" "Of course not." I blinked and smiled faintly. I just suddenly remembered that my cousin the Emperor's birthday is approaching soon. The moment I stepped into the Chancellor's residence, a sharp crack echoed from the main hall. It was the sound of porcelain shattering. Judging by the sound, it must have been fine ware. TSK. That was Uncle Shin's favorite tea set. Scorching tea splashed onto Shinchini's robes, yet he still shielded the woman behind him. "You ungrateful son! Do you know what you're saying?" Uncle Shin glared at him, veins bulging on his temples. Shinchini stood tall, his voice firm. "I will marry Shushu." Aunt Shin, who was nearby, spotted me and hurried over, finding me a chair to sit on. Only then did I get a clear look at the girl behind Shinchini. She wasn't beautiful, but she was fairly pretty. Still, with looks like hers, she probably wouldn't even be known by name among the young ladies of the capital. Her clothes seemed to be made of coarse linen and looked quite old. Many patches had been laundered to a pale whiteness, and several patches had been sewn on, making it look even less presentable than Yue's. As I pondered this, Miss Susu suddenly lifted her head and met my gaze. She immediately lowered her head timidly and shifted further behind Shinchini, as if she had been wronged. Shinchini sensed her evasion and turned to me, his expression hostile. "Miss He, though we were betrothed long ago, Shushu and I now share mutual affection. I implore you to grant us your blessing and spare her any hardship." Me. When did I ever cause her hardship? By the looks of it, Shinchini was a bit blind. "How dare you!" Seeing Shinchini speak to me so harshly, Shinchini's mother, standing nearby, finally lost her temper. She slapped Shinchini across the face. "Our Shin family and the He family are long-standing friends. Your marriage to Nanji was arranged long ago. And now you want to break it off for some peasant girl? Where do you place the honor of the Shen and He families? And where do you place Nanji's honor? Mrs. Shin pointed her finger right at Shinchini's nose, her voice boiling with rage. "But the one I love is Shushu. And what's more, Shushu is now carrying the bloodline of our Shin family. I absolutely must give her a proper status." Shinchini, his face flushed and swollen, stared straight at me. Oblivious to the increasingly grim expressions of Shinchini's parents, he continued, "I humbly request that Miss He dissolve our engagement." Agreed. The moment he finished speaking, I responded, "Upon returning to the estate, I shall have father send the divorce papers to honor young Master Shin's sincere feelings." The Shen and He families were long-standing allies, and my betrothal to Shinchini had been arranged while I was still in my mother's womb, a promise sealed by our unborn children's touch. 16 years had passed since then. Yet to say Shinchini and I shared deep affection would be untrue. In truth, we scarcely knew each other. Simply because, when I was still young, the Shin family sent Shinchini to study at the renowned Egret Academy. Their sole purpose was to equip him with scholarly brilliance, ensuring he would be worthy of me in the future. Now, I suspect he must have studied himself into stupidity, to be so utterly clueless about the situation. This man. I'd rather not marry him. Shinchini seemed genuinely surprised by my swift agreement. After a moment, he regained his composure and offered a somewhat delighted, "Thank you. You ungrateful son. Your father sent you away to study, hoping you'd broaden your horizons and gain experience, so you could one day be worthy of Nanji. Yet you commit such treacherous acts. Do you intend to drive your mother and me to our graves?" Unlike Shinchini's triumphant joy, Uncle Shin was so enraged he smashed another porcelain cup. Shin's aunt stepped forward, taking my hand. Her usually serene eyes brimmed with apology and guilt. "Nanji, I've watched you grow since childhood. In my heart, you alone are worthy of entering the Shin household." I squeezed her hand in consolation. All these years, she truly had been the kindest person to me, aside from my own parents. She patted my hand, then turned to glare at Shinchini. "So now you're determined to defy me and your father for this woman? To renounce your betrothal to Nanji?" Shinchini straightened his back and declared with unwavering resolve, "Yes." Hearing this answer, the expressions on Aunt Shin and Uncle Shin's faces shifted abruptly, a mix of disappointment, anger, and scorn, until finally settling into stillness. Uncle Shin spoke first. "I, Shin Yunchuan, have always valued my word. Therefore, the betrothal between the Shen and He families shall not be annulled. A legitimate son of the Shin family will marry Nanji. Since you refuse to marry Nanji, from this day forward, I, Shin Yunchuan, no longer have a son named Shinchini. The Shin family has no young master by that name. Leave." With that, Shin Yunchuan turned away and waved his hand toward the servants standing nearby. The servants immediately obeyed, stepping forward to escort Shinchini and his shushu girl out of the mansion. Shinchini seemed to want to say something more, but ultimately closed his mouth. With a flick of his sleeve, he took Shushu's hand and prepared to leave. "Wait." Just as he was about to step through the estate gates, Shinchini's mother suddenly spoke up. "Now that you have severed ties with the Shin family, you cannot take anything from the estate with you." Shinchini's footsteps halted abruptly. His body swayed slightly, and Shushu turned back in disbelief to look at Shinchini's aunt. The brocaded robes, gold and silver ornaments, jade pieces, silver notes, and money pouches, Shinchini cast them aside one by one until only his undergarments remained. With each item he discarded, a flicker of heartache passed through Shushu's eyes. But it was unclear whether her pain stemmed from the humiliation he endured or the scattered treasures at his feet. Among those discarded items were many gifts I had given Shinchini, each a rare treasure of the world. "Nanji, this matter is the Shin family's fault toward you. It is also this unworthy son who is unworthy of you." Once Shinchini and the others had walked far away, Aunt Shin hurried to comfort me. "As for the matter of breaking off the engagement, we must discuss it with your parents. But rest assured, I am as close to your mother as a sister. Even if you and our Shin family are truly destined to part ways, I will treat you as my own daughter. You shall never suffer the slightest injustice. Do not let this matter create distance between us." I gave her a gentle smile and said coquettishly, "Of course not. Nanji still wants to eat Auntie's chestnut pastries in the future." Aunt Shin's frown eased as she smiled. "We happened to gather fresh chestnuts today. I'll make some for you right away." News of Shinchini's break with the Prime Minister's household spread quickly. With no major events in the capital for so long, the ladies and young misses of various households had little to do but sip tea and admire flowers daily. Naturally, they wouldn't pass up this opportunity to pass the time. Within just 2 or 3 days, every detail of Shinchini and Lu Shushu's affair had been thoroughly investigated. Miss Shushu, whose real name was Lu Shushu, was originally a peasant girl from the foot of White Egret Mountain. Her parents had died young, and she had always relied on the charity of a kind-hearted neighbor to survive. Just a short while ago, she was set to marry the youngest son of that family. But a month before the wedding, she met Shinchini and became pregnant with his child. Thus, the marriage fell through. However, Lu Shushu had thought she had climbed a high branch. Little did she know that before she could even enjoy half a day of this newfound fortune, Shinchini was kicked out of the chancellor's residence. Seated in a private room at the exquisite delicacies pavilion, I nibbled on pastries while eavesdropping on the gossip from the neighboring table. At the juiciest parts, bursts of derisive laughter drifted over. The exquisite delicacies pavilion was the finest tea house in the capital, catering exclusively to the wealthy and powerful. News circulating among these circles was usually reliable. I paid little attention to Shinchini and Lu Shushu's affairs, so I hadn't bothered to investigate. I'd assumed their whole "no one but you" act was just a play, never imagining such a story lay behind it. Seems these two are a perfect match, one a traitor, the other ungrateful. As my teacup emptied and the osmanthus cake plate grew bare, the gossiping from the next table died down. Seeing the guests had likely grown weary, I rose to head home. No sooner had I returned to the manor than a servant announced a woman sought an audience. Lu Shushu came to see me, dressed in the finest brocade robe and skirt, her hair adorned with 2 golden hairpins. Her attire certainly lent her an air of nobility. Alas, standing before me, she remained as awkward and uneasy as ever, unable to utter a word for a long while. "Miss Lu, if you have something to say, please speak plainly." I picked up the jade pendant from my waist and began to play with it casually in my hand. The jade was warm-toned, lustrous as water, a gift my father had specially sought out, knowing my aversion to the cold. Lu Shushu gazed at the pendant in my hand, a faint gleam flickering in her eyes. "Miss He," she said, her voice timid and aggrieved, "I have come to ask for your blessing to unite me with Chingy." I raised an eyebrow. Hadn't I already agreed to grant their wish that day at the Shin residence? Why was she now making it sound as if I were deliberately obstructing them? After a moment's silence, I spoke slowly. "Miss Lu, I stated clearly at the Chancellor's residence that I would grant your wish to be with Shinchini. What exactly is your purpose in coming today?" "Miss He." Lu Shushu lifted her gaze to meet mine, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know you are magnanimous and broad-minded. Today, I come to ask you to formally break off your engagement with Chingy." I froze. What connection could my decision to support them have with my own betrothal to the Shin family? Before I could fully process this, Lu Shushu's tear-filled eyes met mine again as she continued, "You know well that Chingy has become the laughingstock of the capital because of this incident. He is such a proud man, how could he bear such humiliation? Miss He, I know my uncle and aunt must have been overcome by anger that day when they drove him away. After all, Chingy is their own flesh and blood. Besides, I am carrying the Shin family's child. If only. If only." Before she could finish, I cut in abruptly, "If I formally annul my engagement to Shinchini, removing the source of their anger, they'll forgive him. Might they even accept you, bringing you both back to the Chancellor's residence, out of consideration for the child in your womb?" How laughable. Though Shinchini's humiliation was connected to me, it wasn't caused by me. Now her tearful pleas made it seem as if I were the one at fault. "Yes." Lu Shushu nodded eagerly, a faint smile touching her delicate features. A chill gripped my heart as I replied coldly, "Then Miss Lu, you've likely sought the wrong person. Setting aside that Shinchini's predicament isn't solely my doing, the reason Lord and Lady Shin were so furious that day was entirely because of you." "Me?" Lu Shushu's expression froze at my words. Setting down the jade pendant, I rose and walked to Lu Shushu's side, letting out a soft sigh. "Of course it's because of you. Shinchini may be a bit foolish, but he is still the young master of the Prime Minister's household, a man of noble standing. If not for you, he could have continued living as the legitimate heir of the Prime Minister's family. Why should he have ended up like this? So if you truly care for him, you should leave him directly instead of shifting the blame onto others." Lu Shushu opened her mouth, finally shedding her usual delicate, innocent demeanor. She gritted her teeth and murmured, "Chingy and I truly love each other. No matter what, I will never leave him. TSK, quite the devotion. Pity she'll never be accepted by the Shin family." Unsatisfied with my response, Lu Shushu seethed inwardly, yet could do nothing. Finally, her face darkened as she offered a perfunctory, awkward curtsy. "In that case, Shushu won't trouble Miss He any further." With that, she turned and left without looking back. I thought the matter would end there, until early the next morning when Shinching stormed up to the He residence gates. He claimed that after returning from my place yesterday, Lu Shushu had been in a foul mood, weeping uncontrollably and nearly endangering her pregnancy. In his eyes, it must have been me deliberately making things difficult for Lu Shushu, even maliciously slandering her. Young Master Shin, you're overthinking this. While I did exchange a few words with Miss Lu, she was the one who sought me out. What I said was nothing but the truth. It wasn't just that I didn't make things difficult or slander her, it wasn't even harsh words. His face twisted with contempt as he glared at me. I once thought you were a virtuous and magnanimous person, and even felt remorse toward you. But now I see you're nothing special. If anything happens to Shushu or the child she carries, I won't let you off the hook. I frowned, convinced he must have truly lost his mind. After a moment, I waved my hand at the gatekeeper. Close the gate. If he comes again, simply turn him away. My betrothal to Shinchini had always been a joke. Years ago, before Uncle Shin became chancellor, the Shin family was deeply impoverished, living in nothing but a dilapidated thatched cottage. The He family, however, had generations of merchants and were never short of wealth. My father and Uncle Shin had grown up together since childhood. Recognizing Uncle Shin's integrity, ambition, and boundless talent, my father supported him selflessly. From navigating social connections to covering daily necessities, my father never spared any expense for matters money could resolve. Fortunately, Uncle Shin did not disappoint my father's support. After passing the imperial examinations, he rose steadily through the court ranks until he ascended to the position of chancellor. To repay my father, Uncle Shin had long ago promised, if my mother bore a son, he would adopt him as his own, offering lifelong protection. If she bore a daughter, she would marry into the Shin family, inheriting its estate. At first, my parents dismissed this as mere jest. But on the day of my birth, Uncle Shin arrived bearing 99 palanquins of betrothal gifts, thereby sealing this marriage alliance. Yet no one could have foreseen that this seemingly unshakable bond would be so easily torn apart. Shinchini and Lu Shushu naively believed Uncle Shin and Aunt Shin would eventually accept their love. Little did they know that, given the He family's debt of gratitude to the Shins, Uncle Shin would rather remain childless than allow the woman who humiliated me to enter the Shin household. Yet Shinchini remained immersed in Lu Shushu's tender embrace, utterly oblivious to his precarious situation. When he departed the Prime Minister's residence that day, he had returned only the items he carried, though he still possessed some silver stored elsewhere. Unwilling to see Lu Shushu and the child within her suffer, he arranged everything with meticulous care. The residence was a 3-courtyard compound, though not as grand as the Chancellor's mansion, it was still quite imposing. The bedstead was crafted from rosewood, perfect for nurturing body and mind. Even the food and drink were procured according to the standards of the former Chancellor's household. Xiaoya chattered away to me about all the things he'd bought these past days. I did a quick calculation, it must have been at least 2,000 or 3,000 taels. That was several times more than what he'd spent on gifts for me over the past decade. Truly, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Even a fallen young master is better off than the common folk. I just wonder how long his savings will last. It wasn't until half a month later that I saw Lu Shushu again. While out shopping, I happened to spot her emerging from the exotic treasures pavilion. Her complexion had grown noticeably fairer and more translucent, and a distinct bulge had appeared at her lower abdomen. It seemed Shinchini was taking good care of her. Upon seeing me, she shed her former timidity and lifted her chin with a hint of smugness. "Miss He, it's been quite some time." I shook my head impassively. "Not long. We met just half a month ago. If I could, I'd wish we'd never met at all." Recalling how Shinchini had caused a scene at the He residence for her last time, I frowned and silently distanced myself, wanting nothing to do with trouble. Lu Shushu visibly startled, her smile freezing for a moment. She quickly regained her composure, placing a hand on her belly as she asked, "Miss He, are you here to collect jewelry as well?" My husband said Asian Pavilion has the finest carving work, so he specially commissioned a pair of jade pendants for me. I narrowed my eyes and only then noticed the jade pendant at her waist. The finest white jade had been carved into a blooming lotus, translucent and smooth, vividly lifelike. It truly was a magnificent white lotus. Yet this jade felt strangely familiar to me. After a moment's scrutiny, it suddenly dawned on me, This jade plaque must be the token I had once given to Shinchini as a pledge of our affection. There was no other reason. Jade of such exceptional quality was likely unmatched outside the He family. Originally the size of a palm, this jade had been unexpectedly acquired by my father, who had intended to present it to the imperial court. But when Shinchini left the capital to pursue studies, father had it split into 2 jade pendants. One was given to me, the other to Shinchini, a symbol of perfect union, meant as my token of affection for him. Now, that pendant, already divided once, had been cut into 2 pieces again, and there it was, gleaming brightly at her waist. Lu Shushu likely intended to disgust me. And disgusted I was. The finest jade, split and split again, had become this petty, cheap-looking thing. Well, it was probably the most valuable item Shinchini possessed now, aside from those scattered silver coins. A mere jade pendant, good enough to fob off a beggar. Lifting my gaze to meet Lu Shushu's eyes, glistening with smug satisfaction, I remarked nonchalantly, "What sort of trinket requires this young lady to fetch it herself?" Such tasks belong to servants. Living off Shinchini's accumulated wealth, Lu Shushu truly indulged in a life of extravagance. Alas, even the tallest gold mountain will be mined dry someday. Worse still, Shinchini, accustomed to having his clothes handed to him as a pampered aristocrat, had no means of earning his own fortune. In little over a month, word spread that the Shin household had grown strapped for cash, and many servants had been dismissed. Now Shinchini was scrambling everywhere, trying to find a decent livelihood. The Mid-Autumn Lantern Festival brought bustling excitement to the capital. I strolled by the lake with Luo Wanyin, the eldest daughter of the prefect of the capital, admiring the lanterns while she regaled me with the latest amusing tales from the city. As always, Shinchini and Lu Shushu's little affair remained the talk of the town, the perfect topic for after-dinner gossip. Luo Wanyin and I were very close. The broken engagement had left her deeply dissatisfied with Shinchini. Whenever she heard anything about him and Lu Shushu, she would launch into a righteous tirade, ranting for quite some time. I sipped my tea, smiling gently as I patiently listened to her vent. Every now and then, I would offer her another cup to moisten her throat. Only when the teapot neared emptiness did she finally exhaust her fury and cease her tirade. If you ask me, Shinchini is utterly blind. That Lu Shushu is nowhere near your caliber. After downing another cup, Luo Wanyin sighed deeply. I smiled reassuringly. You say he's blind, but they say even a blind cat can stumble upon a dead rat. I'd rather not be that dead rat. Luo Wanyin shot me a playful glare, her expression softening slightly. Only someone as magnanimous as you would let them stir up trouble like this. I offered a faint smile, neither confirming nor denying. It wasn't that I was truly magnanimous, but my body had been pampered since childhood. It was precious indeed. To waste my energy on people not worth it would be a terrible loss. As I pondered this, Luo Wanyin seemed to recall something and said excitedly, "Nanji, did you hear? The emperor's newly appointed Hanlin scholar took office today." I nodded. Of course I know. I hear His Majesty holds this new scholar in high regard. Not only did he grant him the position, but he also bestowed 1,000 taels of gold upon him. Such a reward is unmatched among the officials. Luo Wanyin leaned closer to me and lowered her voice. But do you know that this new scholar has some connection to the Shin family? Me? My hand paused mid-pour as I looked at Luo Wanyin in confusion. She arched an eyebrow and smiled, her almond-shaped eyes brimming with schadenfreude. The new scholar is named Shintan. Rumor has it he's a distant relative of the Shin family, Shinchini's cousin, to be precise. The day Shin Hanlin took office, Shinchini and his rustic new bride showed up bearing congratulatory gifts, claiming they wanted to catch up. She paused briefly before continuing, but Shinchini was turned away at the door. He couldn't even enter the Hanlin residence, looking utterly humiliated. Shintan? Hearing that name, I couldn't help but pause in surprise. I knew the new Hanlin scholar bore the Shin surname, but I'd never imagined he'd be connected to the Shin family, let alone Shintan. Come to think of it, it wasn't just Shinchini. I, too, knew this Shintan. Shintan was indeed a distant relative of the Shin family. When Shinchini and I were young, we had even spent some time together. Similar to Uncle Shin's circumstances, Shintan's father had also lived in dire poverty. The difference was that Uncle Shin had my father as a brother and confidant, while Shintan's father was far less fortunate. When I was 6, a severe drought struck the south, making grain more precious than gold. Shintan's parents both starved to death during that famine. Only Shintan survived, clinging to life with a single cake for 7 long days until Uncle Shin arrived with relief supplies. Unable to bear the thought of Shintan being left utterly alone, Uncle Shin brought him back to the capital to raise him. This upbringing lasted 3 full years. Throughout those years, Shintan devoted himself to his studies. Not only did he compose masterful essays, but he also developed unique insights into governance, emerging as a prodigious young talent. Even His Majesty, then merely the Crown Prince, held him in high regard. That changed when I turned 9. 2 men arrived from the south and took Shintan away. Uncle Shin explained that these men were Shintan's maternal uncles, who had since prospered and now wished to raise him personally. I heard that after being taken back, Shintan continued his diligent studies. Even in the south, a land teeming with scholars, he gained some renown. Later, when Shinchingi went out to pursue his studies, I became increasingly occupied with managing the He family's enterprises. As my responsibilities grew, I rarely heard news about him anymore. I never imagined that now, he would return to the capital, having become the newly appointed Hanlin scholar. On the way back to the mansion, I kept pondering Luowanin's words. She said Shintan had shut Shinchingi out. This was truly unexpected. After all, Uncle Shin had been kind to Shintan, and Shinchingi and Shintan had been as close as brothers in their youth. Given Shintan's temperament, even knowing Shinchingi was now at odds with the Prime Minister's household, he would never have refused him completely without any consideration. Before I could fully grasp the reasons behind this, the carriage suddenly halted. Someone had blocked my path. On the straight, wide road, a ragged old woman lay sprawled across the middle, occasionally emitting faint moans, likely in some physical distress. Seeing me lift the carriage curtain, the driver hurriedly explained, "Miss, the carriage had just reached this spot when we found the old woman lying in the road. We certainly didn't run her over." I waved him off without a word, instead studying the old woman from a distance. She appeared gaunt and sallow, her lips cracked and dry, her breath faint as a thread. Yet there were no visible wounds on her body. It seemed she wasn't injured, but rather starved. Ever since my cousin the emperor ascended the throne, soup kitchens had frequently opened in the capital to aid the destitute. Even street beggars could get a bowl of plain rice porridge every few days. If I guessed correctly, this old woman wasn't a resident of the capital. Most likely, she'd spent all her travel money on the road and gone hungry for so long that she'd collapsed in the middle of the street. The driver beside me wore a grim expression, his eyes darting about uncertainly. He seemed at a loss for what to do. After all, he'd heard plenty of stories about people feigning fainting to scam others. I withdrew my gaze and instructed the driver, "Go help this elderly woman to the side. She must be starving. Buy her something to eat." The driver nodded, pulled the carriage to the roadside, and attended to the old woman as I'd suggested. Only after a bowl of warm white porridge had she gradually regained her strength. Her eyes brimmed with gratitude as she looked at the driver, her bony fingers clutching his sleeve tightly, wanting to thank him. But the driver pointed toward the carriage. The old woman turned and saw me standing beside it. Gazing at each other from a distance, the old woman flashed a faint smile and nodded toward me. I gave a slight nod in return, saying nothing. After settling the old woman, the driver returned to the carriage, frowning as he said, "This old lady is truly pitiful. She says her daughter-in-law eloped with another man. She and her son came to the capital to find her, but encountered bandits along the way. Not only were they robbed of their travel money, but she also lost track of her son. Then let's find her lodging. Afterward, take her to the prefectural office. Perhaps Uncle Luo can help her locate her lost son." I spoke calmly as the carriage curtain fell. But just as the curtain closed completely, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure in moon-white robes darting around the corner nearby. Shintan? That figure bore an uncanny resemblance to the man I remembered. Shinchingi's days grew increasingly difficult. Servants were dismissed one after another. Initially, he managed by cutting expenses, but eventually, he was forced to sell off possessions. Setting aside Lu Shushu's extravagant spending in recent times, the costs of cultivating connections alone were already substantial. In pursuit of a respectable livelihood, Shinchingi made frequent visits to the capital's influential families. Whenever he called on someone, Gifts were essential, otherwise, why would they assist him? Though he had now fallen out with the chancellor's household, he remained the son of a minister. His offerings could not appear too meager. Initially, some had genuinely sought positions for him. Yet this was the capital, the emperor's domain. Any respectable post was fiercely contested. Compounded by Uncle Shin's deliberate sabotage, aiming to make Shinchini suffer, the jobs he eventually secured were mostly grueling and exhausting. Despite splashing out silver, he saw no return. After several fruitless attempts, Shinchini gave up. With his livelihood cut off, he still had dependents at home to support. After months of living in luxury, Lu Shushu refused to endure any more hardship. Using her pregnancy as an excuse, she continued her daily regimen of ginseng and bird's nest tonics. Shinchini, brimming with grievances, had nowhere to vent. He returned to the prime minister's residence several times, only to find the gates firmly shut each time. His repeated failures left him increasingly despondent. While Shinchini and Lu Shushu struggled, my life was exceptionally comfortable. Early one morning, Lady Shin sent a box of Dongzhu pearls to me, saying the emperor had just bestowed them upon the mansion. She suggested I use them to acquire some new jewelry. Gazing at the pearls shimmering with radiant light, I instructed Yuer to select a pair of consort's bracelets for me, intending to pay Lady Shin a visit. Even from a distance, I heard the shattering of porcelain before reaching the prime minister's residence. This was followed by the sharp crack of a slap. Stepping into the courtyard, I found Shinchini and Lady Shin standing in the front yard. Scattered at their feet lay scattered gold, silver, and fine fabrics, along with numerous pieces of precious porcelain. Madame Shin's face was grim as she stared straight at Shinchini, her eyes brimming with unmasked disappointment. Shinchini, his face slightly swollen and reddened, glared at Madame Shin with seething resentment. Spotting me, his expression darkened instantly. "He Nanji, what brings you here?" I gave him a dismissive glance. "What business is it of yours? This is the prime minister's residence." His voice suddenly rose, his eyes bloodshot. "This mansion bears the Shin surname, not he. It belongs to my Shin family. I have every right to know why you're here." I raised an eyebrow, about to respond, when Shin's mother suddenly stepped before me and addressed him coldly. "You know this is the prime minister's residence? You know your own surname is Shin? Knowing all this, how could you still commit such an act that dishonors the Shin family's reputation?" Shinchini froze for a moment under his mother's rebuke, then clenched his fists tightly, seemingly suppressing his anger. "Mother! I'm your and father's own flesh and blood. How can you bear to treat me so coldly and indifferently? Does the He family and their filthy money truly mean more to you than your own son?" Hearing this, I clearly saw Lady Shin stagger slightly. She was genuinely enraged. "Your father and I have never wronged you in all these years. The He family has always treated you as their own, carefully paving your path. Yet you've turned out to be such an ungrateful, heartless bastard." Shinchini's face twisted with scorn. "Is it me, Shinchini, who's ungrateful, or are both the Shen and He families heartless and unprincipled? You abandoning me is one thing, but Shushu is carrying the seed of the Shin family. You favor He Nanji so much, trust the He family so blindly. Do you really expect the He family to mourn you after you pass?" Shin's aunt stared at him coldly, took a deep breath, then signaled to the servants nearby, "Someone, get this man out of here. He is forbidden from setting foot in this mansion again. If he does, I will hold you personally responsible." The servants moved swiftly, dragging Shinchini out the door in moments. To prevent further disturbance, Lady Shin specifically ordered 2 servants to guard the entrance. Only when the commotion outside subsided did Lady Shin take my hand and lead me to a seat in the front hall. After all the commotion, Aunt Shin looked visibly haggard, her mood clearly affected. I placed the precious jade bracelet I'd brought onto her wrist and smiled reassuringly. "Aunt Shin, please don't let these matters trouble you. If they wound your spirit, it would be a loss far greater than any gain." Her expression softened slightly. Patting my hand, she expressed deep relief. "You're the sensible one, Nanji. Unlike Ir, who only brings worry and trouble to his father and me." As she chattered on, I learned that Shinchini's household had completely exhausted its silver. With no other choice, he had stopped providing Lu Shushu with her tonics. To his surprise, Lu Shushu threw a fierce tantrum over it. Unable to bear Lu Shushu's wailing and truly feeling pity for her and the child she carried, Shinchini had forced his way into the mansion when it was empty, intending to take some valuable items. But he was caught red-handed by Shin's mother, who had just returned from an outing. Shin's mother sighed deeply, her words filled with anger and regret. His impulsive actions before were one thing, but now he's been bewitched by that woman, resorting to such theft. What a disgrace to our family. I was speechless. I truly hadn't expected Shinchini to stoop to such a thing. If Shin's aunt had harbored any lingering reluctance toward Shinchini before, she was now utterly disillusioned with him. I had thought that after completely severing ties with the Shin family, Shinchini might finally settle down. But after this incident, Lu Shushu could no longer sit still. That very night, Lu Shushu stood before the Prime Minister's residence, clutching her increasingly prominent pregnant belly. With tear-filled eyes, she wailed for nearly half an hour, drawing a crowd of onlookers. Her words were laced with sorrow, each sentence dripping with grief as she hurled accusations and grievances at the Prime Minister's household. Just as she'd hoped, rumors spread like wildfire overnight throughout the capital. They spoke of the Shin family's heartless cruelty, not only neglecting their own legitimate son, but also disowning their own bloodline, leaving their pregnant daughter-in-law and son to fend for themselves. Yue poured me tea while sighing deeply. She had just returned from outside, reporting that now not only the Shin family was being gossiped about, but even the He family was being implicated in accusations of instigating the chancellor. This turn of events held no surprise for me. After all, the close ties between the Shin and He families were common knowledge throughout the capital, and Lu Shushu had always regarded the He family as the greatest obstacle to her marriage into the Prime Minister's household. Just as I was lamenting Lu Shushu's utter foolishness, Luo Wanyin suddenly arrived, her face radiant with unhidden delight. I raised an eyebrow at her and asked, "What brings you here?" She gave me a mischievous grin, her bright little face lifting imperceptibly. "I've come to invite you to see a play." I froze in surprise. A play? What troupe would be performing this early in the morning? Seeing my confusion, Luo Wanyin refused to elaborate further. She hurriedly summoned Yue to fetch a carriage and shoved me inside without another word. What I hadn't anticipated was that by watching a play, she meant witnessing a performance at the Jingzhou prefecture, one specifically about Lu Shushu. A crowd had gathered before the prefectural office. Luo Wanyin led me around to an unnoticed corner, a vantage point that offered a clear view of the entire hall. Inside, Shinchini and Lu Shushu stood with grim expressions. Before them stood two figures, one old and one young, both clad in ragged cloth garments. The younger was a man, appearing to be in his early 20s, with dark skin and a sturdy build, giving off an honest and simple demeanor. The older was an elderly woman who looked somewhat familiar to me. "Have you forgotten? This old woman is the one you had the He family coachman delivered to the Jingzhou prefecture office a few days ago." Seeing my confusion, Luo Wanyin spoke up to remind me. I suddenly realized, that's right. But now I finally understood the situation. So this old woman had come to the capital seeking her daughter-in-law, none other than Lu Shushu. Before Lu Shushu was with Shinchini, she had indeed been engaged to someone else. I thought that matter was long settled, but it seems there's more to the story. "Shushu, come back with us. Your father fell ill after learning you'd left," the honest man pleaded, his face etched with sorrow as he looked at Lu Shushu. The old woman chimed in, "Yes, Shushu. Return with us and live a good life with Zhuanger." Yet despite their earnest pleas, Lu Shushu stood nearby, her face twisted with disgust. She even wrinkled her nose in apparent revulsion. "I know you too wish to reclaim Shushu, but she is now mine. She carries my child. She absolutely cannot return with you." Before Lu Shushu could respond, Shinchini spoke up first, shielding her behind him. "Your child?" The honest man froze, his gaze falling on Lu Shushu's prominent belly. He continued, "The child in Shushu's womb is clearly mine." The words hung heavy in the air, silencing the crowd instantly. My eyes widened in disbelief as I glanced at Luo Wanyin. But Luo Wanyin was grinning slyly, as if she'd known all along. That old woman had previously told my father that her so-called daughter-in-law, though never formally wed to her son, had already lived as husband and wife. But just months before she was to marry her son, this daughter-in-law suddenly became intimately involved with a wealthy young master. Then, a month before the wedding, she actually eloped with that adulterer. And just days before her elopement, the village doctor confirmed she was pregnant. Though the old woman considered her daughter-in-law a disgrace, she couldn't bear to lose the child in her womb. That's why she decided to come to the capital to search for her. After finishing her story, Luo Wanyin blinked innocently and added, "But I only learned this morning that her daughter-in-law was Lu Shishu." I shook my head, inwardly marveling at how Lu Shishu had brought this upon herself. The prefect of Jingzhou, acting on my request, helped the old woman find her son. Seeing how much his mother had suffered on the journey, and with both of them penniless, her son decided against pursuing the matter further. Unexpectedly, just as they were preparing to return home, they happened upon Lu Shishu crying and causing a scene at the gates of the prime minister's residence, drawing a crowd of onlookers. Though Lu Shishu now wore rich brocade robes, a stark contrast to her former self, the couple still recognized her. They immediately returned to the prefectural office and filed a formal complaint against her. Thus began this dramatic courtroom spectacle. During the brief deliberation, Lu Shishu in the main hall was already weeping profusely, her tears falling like pear blossoms. Caught between Shinchini's astonished interrogation and the honest man's firm testimony, she was utterly flustered. It wasn't until the prefect summoned a physician to examine Lu Shishu's pulse, to determine precisely when she had conceived, that the situation shifted. Moments later, the physician diagnosed that Lu Shishu was already over 5 months pregnant. Hearing the physician's words, Shinchini's furrowed brow relaxed slightly. 5 months prior, he had indeed shared a bed with Lu Shishu. His confidence soared, convinced the child growing within her was his. Unexpectedly, the honest man standing nearby, upon hearing Lu Shishu was 5 months pregnant, also wore an expression of absolute certainty. Luo Wanyin and I exchanged a glance, recognizing the same emotion in each other's eyes before both silently sighed. Who would have thought Lu Shishu possessed such scheming cunning, maneuvering between 2 men simultaneously? Yet now it seemed even Lu Shishu herself couldn't be certain who the father of her child truly was. One of these 2 men was bound to be the unwitting victim. As the standoff in the main hall dragged on, Luo Wanyin and I were deep in gossip when Shinchini suddenly swept his sleeve and stormed off, his face dark. Lu Shishu, heedless of her protruding belly and the earnest pleas of her loyal man, clutched her stomach and rushed after him. Was that it? As Shinchini and Lu Shishu grew smaller in the distance, the gathered crowd gradually dispersed. I couldn't help but sigh, this drama had ended far too abruptly. Lost in my thoughts, I felt Luo Wanyin tug at my sleeve. Before I could respond, she stood straight and bowed formally, "Minister Shin." I turned to see a man clad in moon-white robes, his features as exquisite as a painting, his bearing as proud and upright as a pine. Years had passed since I last saw him, and the scholarly youth of my memory had blossomed into a figure of breathtaking beauty. Yet unlike his former reserved and awkward self, Shintan now carried the weight of official rank, radiating a confidence and composure that commanded attention. Before I could fully process the sight, Shintan's thin lips parted, his clear, melodious voice drifting toward me, "Miss He, it's been a long time." I quickly offered a sincere smile, "It has been a long time." "Minister Shin." No sooner had I spoken than 2 figures emerged from behind Shintan, the very mother and son who had confronted Lu Shishu moments earlier. Spotting me, the old woman's eyes brightened with delight. "Miss He, I never imagined you'd be here too. Last time, I didn't get the chance to thank you. Zhuang'er, come thank Miss He. Had she not saved me last time, we mother and son might have been separated forever." The old woman pulled her son forward, insisting he bow respectfully to me. Had I not stopped him, he might have knelt outright. Shintan stood quietly to the side, observing the scene. He then turned his gaze back to me, a faint smile playing around his eyes. This scene made me somewhat uncomfortable. All I could think about was ending it quickly and leaving. "Miss He, I've just taken up my post and have many duties. I will certainly pay you a visit another day," Shintan said before I left. I nodded vaguely in acknowledgement. He didn't know many people in the capital yet, the He family was one of them, so paying them a visit was only natural. The scandal surrounding Lu Shishu and her unborn child had rocked the capital, making Shinchini the laughingstock of the city once more. He had broken off his engagement to the He family for Lu Shishu, even abandoning his status as the legitimate heir to the prime minister's household, essentially sacrificing everything. Yet in the end, the child might not even be his. He had utterly lost all face. I couldn't help but sigh inwardly. At this point, Shinchini's affection for Lu Shushu must be nearly gone, unless he were truly foolish beyond measure. As for Shintan, after he mentioned visiting last time, I'd assumed it would be some time before he came. Yet unexpectedly, he arrived within 3 days. I had just finished dressing when father summoned me to receive the guest. Along the way, I saw rows of maids and servants streaming toward the rear courtyard, each carrying gift boxes. There must have been dozens of them. Just as I was puzzling over this, I saw Shintan seated in the front hall with my father. He addressed father with a faint smile, a small token of my respect. "I hope you'll accept it, father." Father beamed with delight, his face lit up as he looked at Shintan. Though I didn't understand the reason, I couldn't help but inwardly marvel. Even though Shintan was currently a favorite of His Majesty and his future seemed limitless, this gift seemed excessive. To an outsider, it might even look like a betrothal offering. "Nan-ji, come here." Father interrupted my thoughts, beckoning me with a wave. "Father, Minister Shin." I stepped forward and offered a light bow to both of them. "Miss He arrives just in time." Shintan looked at me, a smile playing on his lips as he nudged the food box beside him. "I recall you enjoy chestnut pastries." The food box held a plate of chestnut pastries, golden brown, enticingly fragrant, and still steaming hot. Clearly, they were fresh from the oven. My eyes lit up. "Minister Shin, you've been so thoughtful." Shintan and my father were deep in conversation, leaving me a bit bored sitting on the sidelines. So, while nibbling on the chestnut pastry, I began to secretly observe Shintan. At first glance, he was breathtakingly handsome, truly extraordinary. At second glance, he wasn't just good-looking, he radiated an air of nobility. His robes were woven from cloud brocade, his sash adorned with pale blue gemstones, his shoes embroidered with cloud patterns in Suzhou silk, and a wooden hairpin held his hair. This seemed somewhat incongruous, yet the pin appeared quite old, as if worn for many years, and strangely familiar. "Miss He, why are you staring at me so intently? Is there something on my face?" Before I could recall where I'd seen that wooden hairpin, I suddenly met Shintan's deep, enigmatic gaze. His dark eyes shimmered faintly, like a starlit abyss, captivatingly beautiful. And no. Snapping back to awareness of my earlier rudeness, I hastily shook my head. I merely noticed that Magistrate Shin seemed somewhat different from before. He studied me for a moment before replying with a soft chuckle, "And what do you think, Miss He? Is this change for the better or worse?" "Naturally, it's for the better." The Shintan of the past was handsome, yet he lacked the dazzling radiance and the refined, aloof elegance he possessed now. "If Miss He finds it good, then that is most excellent." Shintan's eyebrows lifted slightly, the amusement in his eyes deepening, seemingly pleased by my words. His smile left me momentarily dazed. He was undeniably beautiful, yet somehow, like a peacock, he kept unexpectedly spreading his feathers, leaving one utterly defenseless. Shintan didn't linger long. After exchanging pleasantries with my father for a moment, he rose to take his leave. Before departing, he looked at me and said softly, "Shinchini has confined Lu Shushu. It seems he intends to wait until the child in her womb is born. As for that mother and child, I've already arranged for them to be settled in the capital. They too wish to wait until the child is born before making their decision." Hearing this, I raised my eyebrows slightly. I hadn't expected Shintan to be concerned about Shinchini's affairs. For a moment, he seemed more down to earth, and I couldn't help but smile. "Thank you for the information, Minister Shin." Shintan regarded me for a moment, nodded, and departed. "Daughter, what do you think of this Shintan?" No sooner had Shintan left than my father sidled over. He gazed in the direction Shintan had vanished, then pretended to ponder deeply, stroking a non-existent beard. "Very good," I replied without much thought. "Compared to that good-for-nothing Shinchini?" My father pressed. "Heaven and earth apart." With that, I pinched a chestnut pastry and took a bite. Shinchini, though handsome and well-proportioned, was a bit dim-witted and had issues with his mind, truly all show and no substance. Shintan, however, was different. From a young age, I knew him to be ambitious and sharp-minded. More importantly, he was good-looking. With effort, he was bound for greatness. Now, it seemed he hadn't disappointed my expectations. Hearing my answer, father seemed quite satisfied. After a moment's silence, he murmured, both bearing the Shin surname, I must say Shintan is indeed a better match for you. Ahem, ahem. The chestnut pastry I hadn't swallowed yet choked my throat, sending me into a fit of uncontrollable coughing. Wait a minute! Was father taking a liking to Shintan? By the time I caught my breath, father had already turned and left with a pleased expression, leaving me alone in the front hall, dazed. Staring at the chestnut pastry in my hand, I remained silent for a long while. It was actually quite tasty. December, nearing the new year. The capital was adorned with festive lanterns and decorations everywhere. Snow fell gently from the sky, and everywhere one looked, the red and white hues blended together, creating a strong festive atmosphere. The biting cold wind blew open all the winter plum blossoms overnight, filling the capital with their faint, chilly fragrance. My cousin the emperor, on a whim, hosted a flower viewing banquet in the palace, and I was invited to attend. We sipped wine and chatted idly with the ladies of the capital until our bodies warmed. Only then did the group head to the plum garden together. Viewing the plum blossoms and playing in the snow was the main event of the outing. Beyond the ladies, many officials from the capital had also accepted the invitation. Though men and women dined separately, we reunited upon entering the plum garden. Among the officials, I spotted Shintan immediately. Unlike his usual monochrome attire, he wore a deep black cloak embroidered with dark gold bamboo patterns. Standing amidst the white snow and crimson plums, he seemed to have stepped out of a painting. As we strolled through the plum grove, Shintan walked beside me. The cold wind carried the fragrance of plum blossoms and a hint of ink, creating an exceptionally pleasant scent. Minister Shin seems particularly fond of this wooden hairpin? I lifted my gaze to meet his. Even in his splendid attire today, he still wore that unassuming wooden pin in his hair. Shintan paused slightly, then gently stroked the wooden hairpin. He gave me a tender smile. Snow swirled through the sky, red plum blossoms bloomed in full splendor, yet in that moment, everything else suddenly faded into insignificance. When I first arrived at the Prime Minister's residence, I lost a jade hairpin. This one was handmade by a foolish girl who wanted to comfort me. He gazed at me, his eyes flickering. I froze, a hazy memory suddenly surfacing in my mind. Back then, Shintan had just been brought back to the Prime Minister's residence by Uncle Shin. Having endured a drought, he looked pale and emaciated, like a disaster victim. The only valuable thing he possessed was the jade hairpin in his hair. From the moment I could remember, I'd seen countless treasures. To me, that jade hairpin seemed utterly ordinary, yet it was Shintan's most cherished possession, simply because it had been given to him by his mother. Later, however, Shinchungi, being mischievous, secretly played with the hairpin while Shintan was away. Accidentally, he broke it into 2 pieces and even tossed it into the lake within the Prime Minister's residence. Shintan, unable to find his hairpin, sank into a deep melancholy for quite some time. Back then, I watched Shintan, who had finally gained some weight and grown more handsome, waste away again over a mere hairpin. It truly pained me. At first, I had my father seek out the finest jade to craft a new hairpin of inestimable value for him. But when Shintan saw the new hairpin, he refused to accept it. He said that no matter how expensive or exquisite a hairpin might be, it could never replace his own. Perhaps the material had grown more valuable, but the meaning behind that hairpin was irreplaceable. I didn't understand what meaning was, nor why a hairpin could hold such irreplaceable significance. All I knew was that I preferred seeing Shintan full of spirit and vigor. So in the end, I stole the agarwood my father had treasured for years, carving a wooden hairpin for him by hand, guided only by memory. What could a 6-year-old possibly carve? I ruined the fine wood beyond recognition and earned a scolding from my father. But this time, Shintan didn't refuse. He pinned it in his hair, the gloom in his eyes lifting as he smiled at me for the first time. I stared at him, utterly smitten. "You look so beautiful when you smile," I said. "Even more beautiful than Shinchungi. What a pity." He ruffled my hair and asked with a smile, "What's a pity?" I frowned. "It's a pity I'll marry Shinchungi someday. Otherwise, I could marry you." That childhood jest, though sincere at the time, had long faded from my memory. Yet he'd kept wearing the hairpin I gave him all these years. Seeing Shintan before me now, I felt both touched and deeply ashamed. Back then, I really would say anything. The thought of how boldly I'd declared my desire to marry him back then made me want to crawl into a hole, any hole, even a snowdrift. All these years, I'd been held up as the epitome of a proper capital lady, renowned for my decorum and propriety. Yet here I was, having once been so recklessly audacious. Lifting my eyes to Shintan once more, I saw his eyes still crinkled with a smile. The look he gave me seemed tinged with triumph and indulgence. A lump formed in my throat, and I finally let out a soft sigh. The mess I'd created was indeed mine to bear. Once the harsh winter passed and the snow melted, the warm and gentle spring breeze arrived, the perfect season for weddings. Amidst the 10-mile procession of red bridal finery and the clamor of gongs and drums, I sat obediently before the dressing table. Red candles, wedding robes, and crimson silk filling the room. Every corner overflowed with festive joy. The date for my marriage to Shintan was set by my cousin, the emperor. The imperial decree had been proclaimed before the new year, a marriage bestowed by the emperor himself. Before the bestowal, Shintan had his family registry transferred, becoming an adopted son of the chancellor's household. He acknowledged Uncle Shin and Aunt Shin as his parents, repaying the debt of gratitude for Uncle Shin's past rescue and fulfilling the alliance between the Shin and He families. Though his official rank was modest, he spared me no hardship. Our grand wedding was celebrated with extraordinary splendor, the most magnificent event in the capital in nearly a decade. Before stepping into the wedding sedan chair, I stole a glance at him through my fan. Mounted on a steed adorned with crimson silk, his face radiated a bright smile. His eyes shone like warm sunlight, brimming with unmistakable vigor and confidence. Catching my gaze, he tilted his head up, a hint of pride in his expression, like a peacock displaying its feathers. My gaze swept over his face, and I couldn't help but curve my lips upward. Just as I was about to step into the sedan chair, I was abruptly interrupted. Nanji! Nanji, you cannot marry. Amidst the bustling crowd, a figure pushed through the throng and charged straight toward me. I narrowed my eyes, observing Shinchini before me, clad in coarse cloth, his face a picture of disarray. I remained silent, only noticing Shintan's smile fade. The surrounding crowd, however, had already erupted into commotion. They turned toward me, murmuring and whispering in a flurry of voices. Seeing my silence, Shinchini stepped closer, his gaze fixed on me. Nanji, I am the one betrothed to you. How can you marry another? His voice wasn't loud, but everyone present heard it. The area fell quiet. The looks shifted from curiosity to disdain, though Shinchini remained oblivious. I lifted the fan, blocking his gaze, and replied coolly, Young Master Shin, do not forget, it was you who broke the engagement first. Earlier that year, Lu Shushu had given birth to a son. Unfortunately, the child bore no resemblance to Shinchini whatsoever, instead looking as if carved from the same mold as Tianzhuang. Thus, everyone knew full well whose child this truly was. Shinchini, utterly disillusioned with Lu Shushu, banished her and the child from the Shin residence. Tianzhuang, following the judgment of the Jingzhou prefecture, took custody of the child. As for Lu Shushu, after fleeing the capital, she used her seductive wiles to become the concubine of a wealthy merchant. That merchant had some connection to my family. His wife was fiercely jealous and aggressive, so Lu Shushu's future life was bound to be difficult. Shinchini not only lost his child but failed to keep Lu Shushu either. He returned to the prime minister's residence, only to find his uncle and aunt lamenting his foolishness and angered by his lack of resolve. They resolved to abandon him, forcing him to fend for himself outside the household. They believed only through hardship would he finally gain some sense. After enduring a harsh existence, he suddenly recalled a betrothal agreement that could have secured his lifelong comfort. Shinchini looked at me, about to speak, but Shintan interjected, expressionless, my betrothal to Nanji was bestowed by His Majesty himself, with the approval of both the Shin and He families. If you have objections, you may take them up with the Emperor. I couldn't help but shoot him an admiring glance. Using the Emperor as a shield, besides Shinchini, who else would dare such a thing? Truly, as a favorite at court, his spine was as straight as an arrow. Shintan shot Shinchini a glance, cold and contemptuous. The attendants nearby understood the signal and promptly stepped forward to drag Shinchini away. Shintan! You've stolen someone's betrothal, you'll face retribution. He Nanji! You've betrayed your trust. Shinchini was being hauled away, his words cut off mid-sentence as a servant clamped a hand over his mouth. Stealing someone's marriage? Come to think of it, Shin Tan really is full of tricks. He managed to persuade both Uncle Shen and Aunt Shen, even helping him meddle in our relationship. But if he accuses me of breaking my word, I won't accept it. Our He family values integrity above all else. Before Shinchini was dragged far away, I raised my voice. Young Master Shin, you're likely unaware, according to our current generation hierarchy, you should henceforth address Shin Tan as elder brother and me as elder sister-in-law. Shinchini must have heard this clearly, for soon after, the direction he was being led away fell silent. I turned and stepped into the sedan chair. As the wedding curtain fell, I saw the man on horseback gazing at me with tender eyes, as if I were the most precious treasure in the world. I curved my lips. This marriage, won through fate, was truly splendid. The end.